Section 1. Continuity of the chain. The first condition of acceptability is continuity or connectivity of the chain. Ittisal. For the hadith to be acceptable to all scholars, it must be continually linked, one narrator before the other, by each one hearing from the one above him. This hearing, sama' or sama', is the strongest way to acquire the hadiths and the strongest way to acquire the knowledge in general. The scholars differed about which way of hearing is stronger. Should the student hear from the sheikh, or should he present to the sheikh while the sheikh listens and approves what the student presents? Most said that hearing the sheikh is stronger. Others, like Imam Abu Hanifa, said that presenting to the sheikh is better. So that's when you go to a sheikh and you say, "Can I read this on you?" And then you read it to him and he listens to you. That's arud. Because it draws his attention and keeps him alert. However, both are valid and both are called hearing. And our sheikhs do arud a lot. We do both of those. This hearing is the strongest mode of reception, whether a person heard alone or with peers. Whether he read on the sheikh or someone else read on the sheikh while he listened. That's counted too. But not for Quran, as we're going to say. For Quran, you have to recite to the sheikh. When conveying, he says, "He told me," or "He told us," or "I read on him," or "So-and-so read on him while I was listening," etc. He conveys like however he received his knowledge. However, when it comes to taking the Quran, the student must present to the sheikh so that the sheikh can hear his recitation and correct him if need be. That's an argument that someone could make for presentation on the sheikh being stronger. That's the way of taking the Quran. Yani, you have the option when it comes to the Quran, I think we're going to say also, you can listen to the sheikh and repeat back, and that's the best. Or you can just read to the sheikh only, and he doesn't say anything, and that's valid. But hearing from the sheikh will not be reception when it comes to Quran. Yani, not for its recitation. For a proof, yes. When you take a lesson and you get a dalil, then you took that by talaqqi, but not the qira'ah. So, when it comes to taking the Quran, the student must present to the sheikh so that the sheikh can hear his recitation and correct him if need be. It is not enough to hear the sheikh recite. It is not enough to hear the sheikh recite to consider having a chain for whatever the sheikh recited of the Quran. For this reason, the students traveled from town to town and from country to country to hear from the scholars and study under them. And they did not merely read books. Whoever wishes to be successful in the knowledge must have a teacher and must not settle with reading on his own. Sometimes when you talk to someone like a Wahhabi, you might tell him, "You don't even have a teacher," for example. Don't ask him if he has one. Tell him, "You don't even have a teacher." Maybe he has one, but a lot of times he don't. And then from there, you can take control of your conversation by shaming him. Whoever wishes to be successful in the knowledge must have a teacher and must not settle with reading on his own. Al-Bukhari relates that the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man salaka tariqan yatlubu bihi al-ilm, sahhala Allahu lahu tariqan ila al-jannah." Whoever takes a path by which he seeks the knowledge, Allah will facilitate for him a path to paradise. And since one must sit under the people of knowledge, he must love them and not be envious of them or underestimate them. Whoever has ill will towards them will not get the complete benefit from them. Like someone who sits in the masjid, he listens to the teacher, he's like, hey, he's okay. Just like that, just by having this attitude like that, he won't benefit from that one, even if he was not the biggest sheikh. Just by fixing his intention, his benefit from that one will increase, inshallah. The people of hadith have specific terms for expressing their transmission, ada, and reception, tahammul, of the hadiths, or all of the knowledge. Uh, I asked Dr. Kamal Hoot in our Mustalah class when I took from him the explanation of Alfiya al Iraqi. I said to him, is what we are saying here applicable to all the religious knowledge? He said, yes. Maybe he said, of course. Herein, we will only mention a portion and save the rest for other books. Yani, they have terms for their transmission and reception, and we're not going to go through all of them. Just few things, these basics we're covering here. Therefore, to determine the mode by which the narrator took his hadith, the scholars look at his expression, such as for him to say, I heard him saying. This is the most explicit because it eliminates any intermediary. After it comes, he told me. That is not the same as merely saying, he said. So you can see the levels there. Because saying he said does not necessarily mean that the transmitter heard it directly from him. Likewise, the transmitter saying from so and so is not an explicit expression of tahdith, i.e., directly hearing from the one above him. And this last point shall return. Some people objectionably say, what you have just described is exactly like the telephone game. Have you ever played the telephone game? What we have described is not at all identical to the telephone game. In this game, a group sits together, someone writes an expression, and the first person in the group whispers what was written to the next, like they're in a circle, for example, and he's not allowed to repeat. Then the next whispers to the third without repeating. The last person then openly pronounces what he thinks he heard from the one before him. What he says aloud is then compared to what is written and is usually a gross distortion of the original statement. So it's a fun game if you want to play it with some kids. But if you want to do that so that you can actually teach them about hadith and transmission. However, when the narrators of the expression are not whispering and instead are teaching openly and loudly and dedicated and double and triple checking and repeating proudly and reviewing time and again and documenting and memorizing soundly, the result is a well preserved expression. If they were to play that game with every person reciting aloud, everyone would probably memorize the expression by the time they get to the end, and no one would pervert it. So do not get the wrong impression. Rather, study and memorize and join the procession. Benefit: nursing an expression while transmitting. Al Iraqi said, I'll just read the English, inshallah. If you want to copy without a chain a weak hadith or something whose authenticity or weakness is doubtful, and you don't know if it's strong or not, then do not mention it with sighat jazm, an expression of definitiveness, like he said and he did, etc. Rather, come with sighat tamrid, an expression for nursing the conveyance, like it is narrated, it was narrated, it came, it reached us. Some have narrated, and the likes of that. So this is permissible, it's not haram. That's honesty as long as you're not taking advantage of some people who they don't know what you're doing with your words. If the people you're talking to realize what you're doing with your words, then it's honesty. He said, repeat, yes. So he says, I'll repeat the whole thing from the top there. If you want to copy without a chain a weak hadith or something whose authenticity or weakness is doubtful, then do not mention it with an expression of definitiveness, like he said, because that's being definitive. He said, or he did, etc. Rather, come with an expression for nursing the conveyance, like it is narrated. There's some weakness in there when you say it that way. Or not that it is necessarily a weakness, but it gives the impression of some weakness. It is narrated, or it was narrated, or it came, or it reached us. Or some have narrated, and the likes of that. Yani, قد يقال, قيل, يروى, for example. Those are some of the Arabic words. As for your mentioning an authentic hadith without a chain, yani, what if you had an authentic hadith and you wanted to mention it without a chain of narration? Then mention it with an expression of definitiveness. Say, he said, because it's authentic, without producing the chain. Like, let's assume you don't even know the chain, but you know it's authentic. Then you can say, he said. Al-Iraqi said in another spot, because these expressions are most frequently used for what is weak, although they may be used for what is authentic. So just because someone said it was said, that doesn't mean that it's weak report. So any question that's clear, brother? Abdul Qawi, that's clear? Okay. Benefit, other ways of acquiring a hadith. As stated, the scholars have documented several ways of receiving a hadith. In this beginner's manual, we will only mention a couple besides hearing. One way to get a hadith and be included in the continuity of the chain is by permit or license, ijazah. However, in our day, some people are more impressed with this type than they should be. Today, when some hear about another having an ijazah, they assume that he is a high ranking scholar or authority. And this is not necessarily the case. Could be a commoner, has an ijazah in Sahih al-Bukhari. To have an ijazah is permission to narrate, especially what one did not hear. You could have an ijazah and have heard. You could have both. That's possible. And it's possible to have heard and nobody gave you an ijazah. And it's possible to have an ijazah and have not heard. So, in case you heard and you didn't have an ijazah, you can convey what you learned. But if your qualified teacher tells you not to, then refrain. Not saying it's haram though, but refrain then. Unless you have yani good reason. Sometimes the teacher will tell you refrain from that because maybe he's afraid that this information is too high. He doesn't want you to go and spread something that confuses people, for example. So you will take his advice, for example. So to have an ijazah is permission to narrate, especially what one did not hear. For example, if a student was taking a book from his sheikh and he dozed off from time to time, so he did not hear some of the words of the book, Or perhaps he was absent for a session. Then he should go to his sheikh or peers and read to them what he missed, or have them read to him. And that's why it's a good idea for those of you who are taking online, if you have connections. And if you don't have any connections, then you should make some connections so that you can have someone to review with. That's very good. Even the Sahaba, they used to do mudhakarah. Mudhakarah, that's their muraja'ah. They used to review together. Or he could be given an ijazah in the book, which patches the gaps that he missed. So then when you read, be mindful, Yani, if you did miss a spot, and then your ijazah is covering that spot, then make a note for yourself. And then when you read to a person, you'll say, I took this here by hearing. And then you'll say, this paragraph here, I got ijazah. And then what's after this paragraph is again by hearing, for example. And even in your lessons, when you take your book, you could document who read, whether it was the teacher or the student, and which student, if there are multiple students who read on that day, and document the date wherever you stopped at. So document who read and on what day. And while we're here, also, if you're taking in Arabic, then be mindful of your harakat, of course, so that you can be precise when you convey. So you're going to develop a system for yourself. When a person is taking a book and he writes notes, then you should be developing a system for yourself. Yani, abbreviations and things like that. And you could even, the scholar said, you could even, for your own book, have a table, like a legend that explains your symbols and things like that. Why? It could be that you might forget what your own symbol means, and that's happened to me. If I look in some of my old stuff, I don't know what did that mean when I put it there. And also, it could be that someone later would get your book and benefit from your book. So you might want to put a key there for what does your symbols mean. Or perhaps a sheikh knew that a student has the proficiency and understanding in the information in a certain book. So he gives him permission in the book without the student hearing it. Might be within his qualifications. If he knows his sheikh's chain and he has a verified copy of the book, he can narrate it by ijazah. He says something like, I narrate by ijazah from so and so. However, hearing, as already stated, is greater than a license. In fact, some of the old elite imams completely rejected the idea of an ijazah. Footnote here. So, Al-Iraqi said, I'll skip the Arabic. What Al-Baji said of a consensus about the unrestricted ijazah is a mistake. Ibn Salah said, this is invalid, for groups of the people of hadith and fiqh and usul have opposed narration by ijazah, and that is one of two reports about Ash-Shafi'i. Judge Hussein was definitive about abolishing it, as well as Al-Mawardi. He was definitive about that in his book Al-Hawi and ascribed that position to the Shafi'i school, basically saying, in the Shafi'i school, ijazah is nothing, according to him. They both said, as Shu'bah said, if the ijazah were valid, the trips for acquiring the knowledge would be canceled. And it is true, a lot of people just ask for ijazah. Among who said of abolishing the ijazah is Ibrahim al-Harbi and Abu Shaykh Abdullah ibn Muhammad al-Asbahani and Abu Nasr al-Wa'ili al-Sijzi. There is also Abu Tahir al-Dabbas and Abu Bakr Muhammad ibn Thabit al-Khudanji among the Shafi'is, and Al-Amidi reports that about Abu Hanifa and Abu Yusuf. So it's not a consensus, the matter of the ijazah. Not originally, but you do not find anyone denying it now. However, this opposition has gone extinct and was overcome by its widespread acceptance. Still not a case of ijma' though. What's this footnote here? Al-Iraqi says, however, that upon which the practice has settled, and by which the majorities of the people of knowledge, whether people of hadith or others, say is the sanctioning of the ijazah and permitting its narration. And Al-Amidi conveys that about the companions of Ash-Shafi'i and most of the muhaddiths. So that's all clear so far? The best type of ijazah is the one that comes with physically handing over a copy of the licensed book to the licensed person. Due to the overwhelming ignorance of our time, one would be more impressed by hearing that someone has an ijazah than by hearing that he sat with and heard from the people of knowledge. Some scoundrels use that to their advantage to make people believe that they are scholars, and perhaps some actually think of themselves as scholars. How would that be far-fetched when some people think of themselves as scholars merely due to the books they read, and they neither have a teacher nor an ijazah? Among the people are those who travel the lands asking scholars for ijazahs while neglecting to ask for verbal lessons. They collect many ijazahs, then go out to the people saying, I have ijazah from so-and-so and so-and-so. Now that you have put the ijazah in its proper place, know that although the ijazah gives permission to transmit what one may not have heard, it is not enough to then pick up any copy of the licensed book and convey from it. Before conveying from that book, the licensed person should check the copy that he wants to use by comparing it to a reliable checked copy. Now, one thing you could do when we say comparing it to a reliable checked copy, if it's something that, let's say, it's simple and you know enough Arabic, you might be able, if you had an ijazah, to sit down, look at your copy, and then just go through your copy and find that it's consistent and right and it's fine, apparently. Still, though, you want to compare that because it could be that there's different words or something like that. After comparison and adjusting his copy, he can transmit from it. So you basically just want to match your copy to an authentic copy. So all we're saying here now is that the person hasn't heard. What does he have here in this scenario? He has ijazah. He has a copy of the book, which is his copy, and he has another copy, which is someone else's authentic copy. So then what does he do? He compares, he matches his copy to that copy, makes it identical, and then he conveys with his ijazah. And he never heard that. Uh,
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Isn't it kind of dangerous constantly doing that? Somebody constantly doing that? Getting a copy for somebody?
It's potentially dangerous. Really boils down to a person. If a person can properly stay in his own lane, then he'll be okay. If you know how not to go out of your lane and you're dealing with ijazah, then inshallah you'll be safe. It means if you don't understand something, then you don't try to explain it. If you're merely just reading the text and you're conveying that text, because there's a difference between transmitting the record, transmitting that record to someone else, and explaining it. Those are two different issues. What we're really talking about here is transmitting. We're not talking about explaining. So if a person is transmitting by ijaza and he's explaining, then he really needs to stay in his lane. And whatever he doesn't understand, he says, I don't know what this means. And he leaves it. And he doesn't let, as we already said, he doesn't let the fact that he has an ijaza go to his head in any way. Ijaza is less than hearing. He should be more proud that he sat under sheikhs and learned than that he has ijaza. But on the other hand, ijaza is very useful, especially if you're a student of knowledge or a scholar. If you're a scholar or a student of knowledge, ijaza is very useful. If you're a layman and you have an ijaza, then I don't know, usually they're not going to do much, usually, with their ijaza, but you have it. And if you can convey properly, then may Allah reward you. So, after comparison and adjusting his copy, he can transmit from it. After knowing that, think about how many people simply buy a copy of Al Bukhari, for example, and without a teacher or a license, or even checking their copy, they sit before the people and teach from it. Just open any book, whatever book it might be. One should have a reliable copy, even if he wrote it out by hand. It does not have to be printed to be taken seriously. Your handwritten copy of a book may be more valuable than a printed copy if it is more precise and through sound isnad. One brother, when I was a new Muslim, he gave me a copy of Tahawi. He wrote it out by his own hand. He had memorized Tahawi and he wrote it and he gave it to me in a copy. Now, this copy, I think I was in high school when I got that copy. So I went to college and then I had some Wahhabis to deal with. So that was the only copy of Tahawi I had. So one Wahhabi told me, where you got that from? I told him Tahawi. He said, show me. So I showed him my copy. He's like, get that out of my face, man. Subhanallah. That's all I had, though. How did the scholars of old make copies? They wrote their copies by hand, or they took a copy of what they wanted duplicated to professional, trustworthy scribes. That was a business then. Nowadays, you have, Kinkos and campus copies and stuff like that. Well, you have some methods. I don't know all of what they might know. I don't know what tricks of the trade they may have. But one way of copying a book is basically to look at the first one and then copy, and then look again, and then copy, and then look again, and then copy. High chance for mistakes here, though. A better way is to work with someone. So have someone read to you, for example, and you write, and then you might read back, for example. And then that way you'll make sure you have good copy. Maybe they have some other tricks, Allah knows. So, how did the scholars of old make copies? They wrote their copies by hand, or they took a copy of what they wanted duplicated to professional, trustworthy scribes. What is the source of the modern printed copies? These copies that we have now typed up and printed. Handwritten manuscripts. A reliable copy is of the utmost importance because a misprint could fall anywhere, even in the title. There could be a missing word or a missing sentence or even entire paragraph. I've seen all of that. There could be a misspelling or incorrect grammar that may or may not alter the meaning. You might have words in the sentence ran together, for example. They should be separated. It's like one long word. People of knowledge have made mistakes due to corrupted copies. So how about laymen? In fact, unless one has memorized his original copy, his asl, which is his personal verified copy, he should not even convey from a book that he actually did hear, while the copy he has in his hands is not his own checked copy. Is not his own checked copy. That sentence there is not talking about ijaza. Something that you did hear, but it's just not now your copy in your hand. Then, unless you have memorized your copy, so when you look at this new copy, you know the difference, then still better not to convey from that. There could be a misprint or an addition or subtraction in that foreign copy that is not in his own copy. Perhaps he made an adjustment or a note for clarity in his copy that he does not recall. Maybe there was a mistake in the book. And then you have the correction, meaning the mistake is really from the author. Maybe the author made a mistake, so then you had the correction in your copy. Now you have a foreign copy, you don't have your correction there, and then some publishers are very sloppy and inaccurate. That's the last I knew about the publishing house called Darul Kutub in Beirut. Maybe they've improved since. Allah knows. But the last thing I got from Darul Kutub a few years ago was horrible. Horrible. Some publishers are very sloppy and inaccurate, and some are even devious. Yani, that book, I think I have it. There's so many mistakes in there that I was just making a log of how many mistakes I found on one page. Maybe average 3 mistakes every page, something like that. Some publishers are very sloppy and inaccurate, and some are even devious, like Darus Salam. That's Wahhabi Publishing, and that's a worldwide publishing house. Do not let an ijaza be your target. Let it be strong, authentic transmission, with or without an ijaza. The ijaza is the excuse that some Wahhabis have given to Al Albani. They claim he is a world class hadith scholar. So, when challenged about his qualifications by it being said to them, produce a chain of narration from Al Albani back to the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if he's a hadith scholar. They say, while unable to produce a single chain, he has ijaza. This is a horrible answer. For even if he had an ijaza, that does not negate the existence of a chain. Also, having an ijaza is not at all sufficient to be a hadith scholar. He's a master hadith scholar. He doesn't have a single chain. For almost anyone can get an ijaza, even the mere students, and even a layman. Sheikh Samir give a lesson, give all the people ijaza in Riyadh al-Salihin or something like that, or Arba'in al-Nawawiyah, for example. Some scholars at the end of their books have given ijaza to everyone. They said, Any, anyone who finds this book or has this book, he can convey it. Furthermore, had he had a chain, this still would not make him a scholar. Even if Al Albani did have a chain, that still wouldn't make him a scholar. Yani, we're challenging the Wahhabi. Bring us one single chain from Al Albani. If he ever managed to do so, that wouldn't even make Al Albani a scholar anyway. For the mere students have chains. The true scholars not only have chains, but many, many chains. In fact, they may have many chains for any individual book, as a testimony to how many times they reviewed the same book on different sheikhs as they traveled the lands, benefiting from scholar after scholar. Thus, his lack of even a single chain is an indication that he is not among the people of hadith, and that instead he is bankrupt and corrupt for posing as one. He's a fraud. A Wahhabi once claimed to have a chain for Al Albani. This is a discussion that I had with a fool. When it was requested of him to produce it, he refused, claiming that it must be protected from the hands of the enemies. That was after he got back to me. First, I challenged him. He didn't have a chain. He got back to me. He said, I got the chain. I said, show it to me. So he said, no, these need to be protected from people like you. When it was requested of him to produce it, he refused, claiming that it must be protected from the hands of the enemies. The chain is the tool for distinguishing the authentic from the fraudulent. What is the point of having a chain and keeping it a secret? Another way to acquire a hadith is by finding wijada. This is the last way to get a hadith. So we skipped a few, as we said. This is all the way at the back. But when the scholars spoke about finding a hadith, they meant finding it in the handwriting of the sheikh, while, of course, recognizing the handwriting. And those old scholars, they used to know the handwriting of the other scholars because they were dealing with manuscripts. So they might know the handwriting of Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, even centuries later. One would know this is the handwriting of Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, this is the handwriting of Fulan. When the scholars spoke about finding a hadith, they meant finding it in the handwriting of the sheikh, while, of course, recognizing the handwriting. In such a case, when conveying, one would say, I found in his handwriting that he said, I once saw, quote, something that Sheikh Samir wrote on a board. So I wrote it down. I don't even know if I have it anymore, and I have no idea what it was. I don't remember. Just that I saw it written in his handwriting on a board. So I wrote it. So I took it, I found it in his handwriting. In such a case, when conveying, one would say, I found in his handwriting that he said, etc. If finding a hadith in the sheikh's handwriting is a weak acquisition, what would be the strength of relying on an unchecked copy that is printed in some standard font and thus is not in any particular person's handwriting, especially when one does not have an ijaza or a sheikh? We're talking about now just picking up a book that you find in a bookstore. That's even weaker, Yani, because it's not in anyone's handwriting. A Wahhabi once said to a Sunni with whom he was disputing, the difference between us is that you continually tell me what you heard, while I tell you what I read, thinking that the fact that his information was from books made it more authentic and relevant. Throughout all of his reading, did he not read in the hadith books all of the chains that say, I heard and he told me? So again, if you wish to acquire and transmit the knowledge soundly, let determination bind you. Put the effort to sit before the people of knowledge, then study and memorize, and put the worldly distractions behind you. We ask Allah to make us among the preservers of the religion and to make us among the people of sound reception and transmission. And